Fly box. Today we're going to tie what I consider my personal benchmark in Catskill patterns. I say that because the Queen of the Waters in Catskill style is probably the most difficult for me pattern that I tie. I've always gauged my success or my technique on this fly versus all the other Catskill patterns. So personally, it's my benchmark, and it's remained that way over many years. Let's go over how I tie. This pattern is tied. It's an old pattern, and its story is it was Theodore Gordon's fly that he caught his first fish on. It's been around forever, and it's tied in almost every variation. There's a wet, a Catskill, a Rangeley style streamer. There's a standard Bucktail style streamer, all tied with the same color variation. The Catskill pattern is probably my favorite. I start with a standard 2x long dry fly hook, size 10, and tan 8/0 uni thread. I'm going to start my thread and leave about 2 head lengths behind and bring my base to the middle and bring my thread back and split the difference somewhat. And that's the point we're going to tie in our wing. Our wing is mallard flank. I prep the wing as such, and I sweep it forward and I tie it in on top of the hook. I measure my my wings to be approximately shank length in this longer hook. I tie it in, make sure I keep it on top of the shank. And let my fingers slip a little bit there. A couple security wraps. Trim off at a 45-degree angle and wrap it back, and then bring my thread forward. Like I said, make sure that I keep things on top of the shank. And then I start my dividing. Since I prepped my hook the way I did, my feather the way I did, the feather will naturally divide. Maybe not perfectly, but as you work it, you'll see that they'll generally stick to the way you prep the feather. And I'll just X-wrap until I get the groups where I want them. And then once you get them split the way you want them, stand your wing up, a couple tight wraps underneath to keep it posted. And there's your wings. Now they'll stand up a little bit farther. And then I'm going to bring my thread back to a point to the just above the barb, right before the bend of the hook to the end of the shank. We're going to tie in our tail. I don't use hackle barbs from the hackle that I'm using for this pattern. I use CDL, and I'm going to take a sizable clump I want this to be a heavy tail. I'm going to tie this in shank length as well. I'll measure it. Tie it in. And that generally will put me, let it move there a little bit, will put me about with the butts of the feather, or the butts of the tail fibers, right about at the transition point, like such. That's just going to help us shape. And I'll overwrap my tail. Lift it up. Put one wrap under. One wrap over. Maybe two. And then I'll post my tail just fine. Next material we're going to tie in is our body hackle. I prep 2 hackles for this, and for this pattern I use Greenwell furnace. It's like a dark ginger furnace, a little bit darker, a little bit lighter than a standard furnace. Not quite as light as a standard ginger hackle though. I'm going to prep this in wet fly fashion. That shiny side towards the eye of the hook. And I'm going to tie it in at an angle. Which will help me wind this in the fashion that I want. And I'll bring my thread up to the transition again. The next material you're going to tie in is your ribbing. Now this will have a natural curl to it. So I'll tie it with the inside, because it's spooled, I'll tie it with the inside of the curl facing away from me. I'm going to tie it on the side of the hook at the transition point. And wrap it back. And then bring my thread back to transition. All this is helping to shape the abdomen of the fly. The next material we're going to tie in is orange floss. Now the original pattern calls for orange silk, and if you have it, use it. I have this orange floss, and it works fine for the body. It flattens out perfect for me. And I'm going to tie it in on the top of the hook at the transition point, and I'm going to wrap it back. And then I'm going to bring my thread forward. When I bring my thread forward, I'm going to help do the final shaping for the taper of the abdomen. And bring my thread up to about the 1/3 point. And I'm going to take my floss, I'm going to wrap it forward. I'll overlap it slightly. Because I want it to taper when I get up to the front. Wrapping over it and overlapping will facilitate that. Just keep it nice and tight. I'm going to bring that up into the thorax just a little bit farther than I need it, and we're going to tie off. And when I trim the butts, I'm going to come down in the middle of the fly between the wing. Give a few security wraps. Next, I'm going to bring my wire forward. Now the reason I wrapped it the way I did, tied it in with the curl facing towards the eye of the hook, is because that's going to allow me a natural bend to bring my tinsel forward. And we're gonna bring it forward at an angle, trying to keep both sides evenly spaced. You can usually get 4 evenly spaced wraps with this pattern. Now bring it up into that thorax area. And tie it off. I'll lift it and trim between the wing post again. And then wrap that down. And the last body material you're going to wrap forward is your body hackle. You're going to bring that forward and stay with the tinsel. You're going to bring that forward and stay with the inside or the forward portion of the tinsel with each wrap, as close as you can. If you can't keep it perfect, it's not going to make or break the pattern. You'll notice it in the end, but it'll still fish just fine. Just bring it forward, follow your tinsel, and when you get it up into that thorax area, tie it off. Now when I say this pattern is my nemesis, and it's a benchmark that I use for my catskill tying, it's because it gives me the most problems. For some reason I can tie most all the patterns just fine, but when I try and tie the Queen of the Water, if I tie 3 versions of it, they'll all look completely different. So to me, consistency wise, this is the pattern that I need the most work on. And I'm doing this for a reason, because everybody has a pattern that is a problem for them. And no matter what they do, the fly just seems to always come out not quite what they wanted. And I guess my point with this pattern is, don't let it intimidate you, don't let it stop you. Continue to tie it. I've been tying this pattern for years. I go back to it, this is like my refresher. I go back to it, I tie a bunch of them until I get them right again, and then I feel better about my tying. But the next thing you're going to do is tie in the collar. Now I use the size 16 hackle for the abdomen. I use the size 10 to match the hook for the collar. I'm going to tie that in dry fly fashion. That's dull side forward on the side of the hook, underneath the post, and then I'm going to bring my post up and stand it up one last time. And it's going to keep it where I want it. And then bring my thread up to the point 1 eye length from the eye. You leave a substantial portion of hook for your head with this catskill pattern, and most. And then we're going to wrap our hackle forward. I like to start counting my wraps after that first one, and then I bring it forward for 3 consecutive wraps. 1, 2, and 3. You can usually get a good tight 3 in there behind the wing. And I pull my wing back, put my first wrap nice and tight in there. And then as before, 1, 2, 3. and then I bring it up to the top to tie off. So 3 full, and then tie off. You don't have to count, but I only tie this pattern in this size and in this exact version, and I have been since I began tying. So I know which count works for me. So what that does is that takes my proportioning and me out of the equation. Like I said, I use this as my refresher for tying. So I stay consistent when I come back to it. A 3 or 4 turn whip finish, leaving that extended portion of your shank behind the eye. Traditionally that was used for a turtle knot. And then a drop of head cement. And there it is, the Queen of the Waters. Wonderful fly with an excellent history. Very effective in its own right still today. A joy to tie and a challenge to tie. Fishes wonderfully in pocket water, both out west and in the east, and is a great skittering pattern as well for panfish. Anywhere you fish it, it applies. Give it a try. You'll enjoy it on the vise, you'll enjoy it on the water. Queen of the Waters, Catskill style. Put it in your box, and I hope it adds to yours as much as it has to mine over the years. Good luck. See you in the water.